We're in chapter 6 of the book.
Chapter 6.
Which is the moral law question.
Oh, before we start, did you ever see this guy, the author, debate some atheists like live on YouTube?
Yes.
Oh, debates, they're amazing.
I got to meet him.
Oh, you had to meet him?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I got him to
Watching one yesterday.
I got him to sign one of my books from him.
Oh, that's so cool.
That was nice. Yeah, those are great to watch, by the way.
So
because,
yeah, they're great.
And I want to show you one or two video clips today because, you know, like when we started this, the first day I did like kind of coming at it from the other, like if you were a non-believer, what do you say?
Yeah.
It's nice because if you watch those things, you can hear both sides and see how someone responds to it, you know?
Yeah.
And what I find interesting in most of those debates is that oftentimes they're talking past each other.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'll say like the other side is talking.
Yeah.
I think he's prepared and he listens to what they're saying and then he responds like, okay, like he uses the same format all the time. He's like, I'm going to give out, here are my positive points and I'm going to wait to hear like the other side give me good reasons that I should hold their belief. And then he'll always be like, well, you know, we didn't hear any good reasons from the other side. Here's all that they said.
Yeah.
Okay. And then in response to what I said, here's what they said. And let me rebut that. And, you know, and the other side never really, and that's one of the things I think you can watch those and miss it. And I've said this before, like almost without exception, they give negative arguments to his positive arguments, but they never offer any positive arguments for their own position.
Never. Yeah, you can see that.
And
it was kind of defer for what he's talking about sometimes, and like you said, talk past it.
And what they're always saying is like they're arguing from a position of agnosticism. Like they just want to say like, well, we don't know, and science is the answer.
Yeah.
It's like, well, okay, why should I hold that position?
Exactly. But they can't give a good reason for that.
Because this guy's offering me good reasons to think that he's right.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's interesting too is his arguments are deductive arguments based on many times the scientific evidence, which like the scientific evidence points to the probability that this is the case, right? So it's again, we can't say 100%, but like the fine-tuning argument. The scientific evidence shows that it's not necessary for the universe to have these conditions. Yeah. So that's out, right? It doesn't have to be that way. And it shows that the likelihood of it happening is so remote that that's not really a plausible option unless you have to go to the multiverse. So therefore, if you didn't have an anti-supernatural bias, anybody that's looking at the data would infer that this was designed. Yeah. Like this was done on somehow, some way, this was done on purpose. Like these numbers just didn't have, like all these factors didn't just happen to come together so that we're here.
Yeah, he was explaining that to Hitchens, the one I was watching yesterday. He said some insane number, the probability of evolution happening. Yeah. It's insane.
But if you eliminate God, then what's called a priori, you already have decided what the answer is, right?
Yeah.
And that's what they miss. Like you're not dealing with the evidence. Yeah. You're saying, and that's even the part of thing when you talk about science, like oftentimes people act like science is completely objective and that they're just following the evidence where it leads. That's not true. Like the scientists oftentimes they go in with presuppositions. In other words, beliefs that they hold before they even start looking at the possible answer to the question. So you're going into it saying, I don't believe in any supernatural cause. Well, that you just eliminated half of the evidence, you know what I mean? So every time you look at the evidence now, you're seeing it in a skewed way because you're saying like, well, you know, this couldn't have been because of God, because there is no God.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, well, then I'm not surprised that you didn't come to the conclusion that God is the cause, because you've already ruled that out.
All power to you, I guess.
Yeah. So we're talking about morality now. And again, I've said this the last couple times we've met, that this is a topic that you guys will like. This is what, like, some of those things, like the science and stuff like that, like you know, when you talk about the stuff in school, it comes up, but not all the time.
Yeah.
This is right in your face.
Yeah.
Like you can try to avoid this and you'll fail, because like, especially in view of right now, like the big push for, you know, sexual orientation, equality, and homosexuality and all that stuff, it's in your face.
Yeah.
And so how do you respond to it? And so what I'm showing, what I'm going to try to show today, is a way to answer those questions without having to go right away to Romans chapter 1, right? Because Romans chapter 1 deals with that. But if someone says like, well, why are homosexual relations any different from heterosexual relations, and how can you say that those people, you know, they love each other, and who are you to say that they shouldn't do that sort of thing? And if you immediately say like, well, Romans chapter 1 says they exchanged the glory of God for corruptible things, and they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and they God gave them over to the lust of their hearts, to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them, and all that stuff. And you start, because it talks about God gave them over to degrading passions, for their women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural, and in the same way also the men abandoned their natural functions, and so on. If you start quoting that immediately, they're going to be like, well, I don't believe the Bible.
Yeah. It's always the answer.
And why would you believe this hate-filled book?
Yeah.
Right? That's where it comes back to, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you deal with that? Okay. So I just want to show you one quick video, and then I'm going to we'll kind of break this apart. I think this is the right video that I want here. I like these videos because, again, you can see it kind of play out.
Hello, I'm Nathaniel.
Nathaniel.
Hello,
No,
Nathaniel.
so you make 3.
That's not what I want.
Oh, this is Tarek, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna try
He's another goal.
I'll do this one. This is the one I want. We'll get to that one in a little bit.
Morality requires some higher objective to come from. God's the last thing it should come from. God
should. Wait. You're using the word should. That's a moral term. Where'd you get that?
The English language.
Okay, but what do you mean? You used it in a way that it was immoral if it came from God. How are you coming up with this standard that it should come from something other than God? Why?
Because morality should not come from God, because in the Bible, God clearly endorses and condones slavery, murder, and rape. He does. And all I need to do to support that is quote Leviticus 25. However, you may purchase male or female slaves among the foreigners who live among you.
Okay.
I mean, why should morality come from God when he endorses slavery, murder, and rape clearly in the Bible?
First of all, is there something wrong with slavery, murder, and rape?
Yes, there is.
Why?
Because it sucks for the people that you're raping or enslaving or murdering.
But it might be fun for the people who are doing it. Right?
Right.
In other words, again, you're importing a moral law to criticize what the Bible says. Let's leave the Bible out of it for a second. Suppose the Bible isn't true. Right?
Okay.
What you can say is, I think the Bible is wrong morally. But what you can't say is, the Bible is wrong morally, but I don't have the standard to call it immoral. You can say that the Bible's immoral only if you have a God that says the Bible's immoral, right?
Yes.
Okay, but you can't be an atheist and say the Bible's immoral. Because you have no standard of morality.
Wait a second, I'm an atheist. I can say the Bible's immoral.
Yeah, but you can't justify it because you have no standard of morality by which to say something.
Yes, I do.
What is it?
I have a standard of morality. It's not okay to kill someone or rape someone or enslave someone.
But that's just your opinion. Hitler says it is. So it's just subjective. It's your subjective opinion against Hitler's subjective opinion.
Yes, opinions are subjective.
So it's not an objective morality then. That's what you're saying. Right? Morality's not objective.
No, it's
There's,
not.
okay, so there's nothing wrong with the Nazis.
He's
There's nothing
fighting an
wrong with
argument that cannot be
rape,
won.
slavery.
To
There's nothing
them,
wrong.
there's not, but to us, there is. And it's very clear
So
that
it's
societies
subjective.
that don't do that are much better off.
Better off. Again, you're importing a moral law. We can go around on this. Do you guys see what we're doing here?
Yeah, we're going in circles.
We're going in circles because you don't have a standard by which to judge anything moral or immoral if you're an atheist.
Okay. Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
Does everybody remember objective, subjective, the difference? Do you remember? You got thrown into the deep end of the pool last week. Do you remember what the difference is between objective and subjective? So subjective means that it's like up here, that ultimately it's based on your tastes or preference or opinion. So it depends on the individual person, right? Like flavors of ice cream. There's no right. If I said, what's the best flavor of ice cream? And you said, chocolate. And I say, nah, it's mint chocolate chip. Are you wrong? No, because there is no best flavor of ice cream. It's just your opinion. And your opinion is your opinion, my opinion is my opinion. Nobody's right or wrong. It's just what you like, right? So if it's subjective, that's what we mean. It's just up to you. It's just your opinion, okay? If it's objective, that means that there really is a best flavor of ice cream somewhere. Now that's not the case in this, but if we're talking about morals and morality and what's good, bad, right, or wrong, then we have to ask, is morality subjective, where what's good, bad, right, or wrong is based on your opinions or beliefs or preferences? Or is there a standard of morality that's true for everyone, everywhere? That's the question, okay? So what I said before, like, so if we take the homosexual thing, right? The two questions that you need to ask, because they're both kind of either or type things. Write this on the board. I should probably erase some of this stuff.
It's not going to come off.
Well, I'll use the spray.
I think you're
So
right.
you have two choices when it comes to human behavior, right? So what we do as people, it's either free, I should just leave it as free. Either my behavior is free, in other words, that means that the me inside of me, is the one who chooses what I do, what I say, what I think, right? Does that make sense? Or it's determined. Okay, so human behavior is either free or determined. Can't be both. It's either one or the other. And so remember, on a naturalistic point of view, what naturalism says is that all that exists is what there is in nature. There's no supernatural, right? So there's no God, there's no angels and devils, and no, that's just matter, right? We're just matter. But we talked about in class before, if the material point of view is true, right? So naturalism is true, then it automatically means that your behavior is all determined. Because there is no supernatural, there's no spirit, you don't have a soul inside of you, right? You're just your brain. And your brain runs according to your DNA and like my sense input, right? So like my eyes, there's light waves hitting my eyes and it's causing chemical reactions and electrical reactions in my brain, and it's producing images in my brain, and my ears are hearing this, and it's vibrating my tympanic membrane, and it's causing neurological responses in my brain. All these things are happening, but I'm just essentially a big walking chemical reaction. And all of the chemical reactions in my body all happen according to the laws of physics. And so if everything that's happening in my body is happening according to the laws of physics, right? If physics is the cause and my consciousness is the effect, then how can I get out in front of the cause in order to change the chemical reactions that are happening in my brain. I can't, right? There's no way that I can control what's happening. So that means that I'm determined. Does that make sense? That's complicated to think about, right? But that is, it just is the way that it is. And all these people, all the naturalists will agree with that. And their response, the best response that they give is, well, since I don't know what's determined, then I might as well just say that I'm free, which is just silly. Like, no. Now, if questions about this, this is a little bit hard to think about, right? Because if you never thought about this, this is one of those where, you know, you could lay in bed at night and go through this for a long time and be like, what in the world? Right? But does this make sense? Follow what I'm saying here?
In some ways.
Right. So, I mean, what it's saying is, if you don't have a non-material part of you, then you're essentially a meat robot.
Yeah.
Right? Like Frank Turek says, a moist robot. Right? Because just like like if I had a robot and I program everything it does and it just behaves, I can't say that it's free because I know what it's going to do based on the program that it has. It's not making its own decisions. The problem is that the most undeniable of all reality is that you exist and I exist. Like I can't, and we talked about this, gets weird, right? Because I can't be 100% sure that you exist. Maybe you're just an illusion in my brain, and maybe I'm just a brain in a vat of chemicals somewhere. Maybe I'm in the Matrix, who knows, right? But there's good reasons not to hold that way. But the point is, like, I know that I exist, right? That's the one undeniable thing. I can't deny that I exist without existing, right? If I say, how do I know that I exist? I have to exist to ask the question, right? So I know that I'm here. Now the question is, am I free to do whatever, like, why did I do that? Was I programmed to do that? Or did I decide to do that? And could I not have chosen to do that? See what I'm saying? I could have chosen not to do that. Why did I do it? Why did I do that? Banana, 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 banana. Like, I'm picking, like, I decide the words that I say, right? That's undeniable. I can do things, I cannot do things. So the question is, am I free or determined? All of my lived experience tells me that I am free. In fact, the interesting thing is, if you're not free, then you can't even make rational deductions from things. You can't have rational thought. You can't listen. Like if I said to you, so are you free or determined? In order for me to take your answer seriously at all, what must be the case?
You're free.
Yeah, that you have to be free.
Yeah. Because
if you're not free, then your answer doesn't even matter because you're just programmed to answer however you're programmed to answer, right? Yeah. And if you say that I'm determined, that's self-defeating, right?
Yeah. I'm
determined. So in other words, I was determined to answer that I was determined. So like you can't even have science if that's true. Because the whole idea of science is that I am looking at this, all the data, and then I'm evaluating it and I'm drawing conclusions. But I can't do, like, that requires rational thought. And if everything I do is determined, then I don't have the capacity for rational thought. I just do what I do. It's like animals have instincts and they just do what they do, right? They don't think about it. They just do it. My dog does stuff, and Noah can attest to this. Like every morning when I go to take the dog out, he'll stop and he scratches his face. He does it all the time. Unless I get the door open fast enough and then he doesn't do it. I don't think his face actually itches. I just think that he just does it. It's kind of like a kind of compulsive impulse type thing where he just like, that's his thing. He's not like, does my face really itch? Should I scratch it? What does it mean to be a dog? What's the meaning of my life? I think I'd like to compose a symphony today. Like they're not like us, right? We're different. That's why morality only has to do with people, if you think about it, right? If my dog does something, I'm not like lecturing it on like sin and moral responsibility and all that sort of stuff because it doesn't apply to animals. Like people are, that's why we say people are made in the image of God. Now, the interesting thing is, what we all experience is that even if I do have, because we do have the fleshly part of us, right? Our body has natural drives and desires and urges. Like right now, since I've been talking, like my mouth is a little dry, I could use a drink. Now, does that mean that I have an uncontrollable urge to go over and get water? Like I must drink, right? No, I'm aware of that. But because we're sitting here and I want to talk about this stuff, I'm choosing, okay, I know that I could use a drink, but I'm going to override that and I'm just going to wait and drink later. Does that make sense? Like when you're driving in the car and you have to use the bathroom, you're like, body's telling me you have to go to the bathroom. Mind's telling me, don't want to pee in the car, right? I can wait till the rest stop in 15 minutes, right? Like animals don't think like that necessarily. Like they do it based on reward and punishment, right? Like don't pee in the car, and you give them a treat if they don't, and so on. But it's different, isn't it? And so here's why I'm saying all this stuff, because in several different college classes, this has come up in different. And so like one class, the whole class was about, it was supposed to be scheduled, it was supposed to be about homosexuality and all this stuff, right? This is a class that we had. And because there was a snowstorm, we didn't have the class. So it was the last day of class and the professor was like, we skipped a couple things that we're gonna talk about in this class. And so I'm just leaving time. Is there anything that we skipped over that you guys wanna talk about? And some students in the front said, well, we skipped over homosexuality and sexuality and sexual orientation, all that stuff. Can we talk about that? So he's like, oh yeah, sure. So he gives like a 15-minute presentation on his thoughts and stuff. And so then I raised my hand, and before I could say what I wanted to say, he gave like a 10-minute like preemptive discourse on here's what Josh is probably going to say. Which I was like, you don't even know what I'm going to say. Like, but he's like, you know, he's going to come at this from a little different point of view. And, you know, so what my question was, because the same professor said to us before in class that you are your brain. He's like, there's no soul, there's no dualism. Like there was a philosopher named Rene Descartes, and he's the guy usually gets credited with coming up with the dualism, right? He said that there's spirit and material world, and like, you know, you have like a spiritual part of you, that's the I. He said that's a bunch of baloney. You're just your brain. And so like, what, we have time, I'll tell you a story. So then he was like, he gave us this example. He said, everybody do this right now. Just start counting by 2, 2, 4, 6, do it out loud. 8, 10, 12.
15, 16, 18,
Keep talking. Mary had a little lamb, so this is why the snow. Everywhere that Mary went, the lamb surely goes. Okay. What did I say? What did I say? Come on. What did I say?
Mary had a little
Yeah.
lamb.
So the point of he was saying is that you can keep counting by 2 and you can still listen to me, because he said that's level 1 of your brain. It's like when you get old enough to get your driver's license, if you don't have it, and you're driving and you drive and you're like a mile went by and you're like, I don't know what just happened. Like you didn't veer off the road and stuff. So obviously you're paying attention, but you're thinking about something else. So he's like, that's level 1, because you don't have to have your full concentration. He said, now what I want you to do is divide 100 by 7, and I'll do the same thing. And you don't have to do that. But the point is that you can't pay attention to what I'm saying and divide 100 by 7. Your brain either I have to give my attention to dividing 100 by 7, or I have to pay attention to what you're saying, but I can't do both. And he's like, that's level 2, right? And your brain has to go between level 1 and level 2. And so my question was, I was like, okay, I'll grant you that. That sounds reasonable. I was like, how does your brain know whether to go from level 1 to level 2? I said, it seems like it would need a level 3, right? That's deciding, oh, got to switch from level 1 to level 2. And he was like, I'll give you that. That makes sense. I was like, okay. So then how does level 3 know to go to level 1 or level 2? It seems like you'd need a level 4 to tell level 3 when to go to level 1 and level 2, right? And he was like, I see where you're going with this. I was like, yeah. Where's the decision-making part of my brain located? How does that work on a natural point of view? So he just let that go, right? So I asked my question, back to my story. I asked my question. So he's like, all right, Josh. So I was like, is human behavior free or determined? And he was like, all right, I see where you're going with this. So here's what he said. Because again, the problem with all this is, if human behavior is determined, then that means that I am not in control of what I do or say or think, right? It's my DNA, and I dance, like Richard Dawkins says, I dance to my DNA. I just do what I do. And he said, there's no bad, there's no good, there's no evil, there's no whatever. We're just dancing to our DNA. So if that means that I cannot really be held responsible for any of my behaviors, if that's true. So if it's true that I'm not free, then the whole moral question becomes non sequitur. It's irrelevant, right? It doesn't follow. Because how can there be any good, bad, right, or wrong if nobody is able to control what they do? That makes sense? So if I'm determined right off the bat, good, bad, right, or wrong has to go away. That makes sense? Now, but this is my argument, and he even said this. He's like, because I said, even if, and the science has not borne this out. Like they've done studies with twins and stuff, and they're looking for the gay gene. You know, like Lady Gaga, born this way, and all that stuff. So I know all about it. I teach high school kids, so I unfortunately am exposed to all this stuff, right? So, but the point is, even if you grant that, which I don't grant it, I think it's a combination of all kinds of different factors, right? Even if you grant it and say, okay, you're born that way, I'll give you that one. It doesn't matter, because if you're free, then you can choose not to act on that desire that you have, right? And so this is what I said to the guy. I was like, I'm not homosexual, I'm heterosexual. Does that mean that I can cheat on my wife? But is it wrong for me to do that? Or is there a way, like, in other words, because I like women, am I uncontrollably then motivated to just go sleep with other women? I can't do anything about it because I'm born that way. That's what I say. I come home and she's like, where were you? And I was like, I was out with Susie. And she's like, whoa. I was like, hey, born this way. Is my wife gonna be like, oh, that's cool? Of course not. Right? She's gonna be like, you kidding me? That's terrible. You can't do that. I'm leaving you or whatever. Like, you can't. So, and he was like, I see what you're saying. I'm like, yeah. So he's like, I suppose that you could be born with the what's the right word? Inclination, that's the word. An inclination towards a certain behavior, but choose not to act on it, which is what the Bible says, right? In fact, any sex that's outside of marriage is not allowed by the Bible. Like, that's a sin, right? Fornication is the word for it, right? So whether it's with a person of the opposite sex or the same sex, like, shouldn't be happening either way. So you can't. So in other words, you can't use that as an argument to legitimize it. Like, well, I'm attracted to same sex, so therefore that gives me free license to just do whatever I want to do. Right. So if people are free, which I think is undeniable, and even this guy had to grant it to me, he's like, I'll grant you that. Okay. Then the question after that is anything wrong with anything? So in other words, I'm not an animal. I can control my behavior. Even if I have an inclination or predisposition to behave in a certain way, I still am able to choose whether or not I act on that disposition. So now the question is anything wrong with anything? And that's where we get back to this. So when we get to morality, remember, it's either or, law of non-contradiction. Either morality is subjective, which means that it's your personal tastes and preferences or opinions, or it's objective, right? Those are the only two choices that you have. So like I said, if it's subjective, that means that you get to decide. But if you think about it, if you can decide, that means by definition that it's not like set in stone. There's no best flavor of ice cream. It's just up to you, right? And so I always like to give the example of Peter Pan, because when I say it's not real, you're like, well, it's real for you. Like, Peter Pan is not real in the same sense, right? Like when I say Peter Pan, you guys know what I mean, right? Okay, so there really is a Peter Pan. There's a Peter Pan movie, there's Peter Pan books. You can buy a Peter Pan doll at the Disney store, I'm sure, right? So there's Peter Pan, but is Peter Pan real? Like you're real. Is he the same? No. If the guy who like wrote the story of Peter Pan was never born, would there be a Peter Pan? No. It's just made up. And morality would be just like Peter Pan if it's subjective, right? It's just made up. And maybe this group of people wants to follow this morality and another group of people want to follow another morality. And who's to say that one morality is better than the other? Because in order to say one's better than the other, you have to have some standard by which to compare the two. And that's what we talked about last time, if you remember. Right? Remember I said, remember I showed you this map? And I said, which is a better map of North America? The only way, like you can't answer the question if you don't know what North America really looks like. That make sense? Because if there is no standard, you can, it just comes back to preference. I like the map on the left. It looks nice and has a little picture on the bottom, right? But that map is worse than the other map in terms of actually being like North America. And that's what, so when you get into these conversations, like ultimately, if you're dealing with that question, you say, okay, is human behavior free or determined? It has to be free. And then if it is free, then the question is, well, is anything wrong with anything? And then like, if you walk through this logical argument, like I'm saying, there has to be some standard. Because in other words, remember we said at the beginning, you can just take whatever they say and throw it back on them and see if, like, how does that work? Like, so if you're saying it's wrong for me to say that homosexuality is wrong, then is it like, where do you get your standard of right and wrong from? Because you're saying that your standard is the standard that everybody should follow. You see what I'm saying? That's one of the biggest things that I've encountered with people. They're like, they want to think that everybody's free to believe whatever they want to believe, but they don't really believe that. Right? They want everybody to be able to believe whatever they believe, as long as they believe everybody's able to believe whatever they want to believe. But as soon as you say like, no, there are certain things that are a certain way, well then you're why the hate?
Yeah, you're a hater.
Why the judgment? Right? Well, it's like you said that everybody's free to believe what they want to believe. Well, not that, right? You're not free to believe that. You have to believe like I believe. It's like, well, wait a minute, you just contradicted yourself. And the problem again, when we get to the moral thing is, like when we talk about who's better than who, and I showed this before, and we talked about Billy Graham, remember Billy Graham? Right? So obviously Billy Graham never systematically tried to eliminate a whole group of people. So just based on that alone, if you didn't know who Billy Graham was, and you knew that Hitler was Hitler, it's easy to say, well, anybody that didn't start a world war and try to kill a whole group of people is probably better. But it only makes sense to say that they're better if you have some standard to compare the better to. And that's why I said, where do you get the standard from? And that's where we're going with this moral law argument again too. If God doesn't exist, then there are no objective moral values and duties. But objective moral values and duties do exist, right? And so for the person who says like, you know, how dare you hate on those people? Well, okay, now you're making a moral claim. Where are you getting your moral claim from? Like, where are you getting your standard from? You see what I'm saying? You can't have your cake and eat it too. And that's why I said, and ultimately, when I did this in another class, the professor said, well, why should we believe your standard of morality? Who says that your standard of morality is right? I said, well, that comes back to whether Jesus rose from the dead or not. I said, and we could debate that one too if you want to, but I don't know if like now is the time or format. He's like, no, I don't want to get into that. I'm like, okay. So we walked out of the class and I got peppered by all kinds, like it was like all these international students, and I was like, they were all like, whoa, and I was able to diffuse all of it. And we walked out, and the professor said to me, I don't agree with what you said, but I can't figure out where you're wrong. He said, so I need to think about it a little bit. And I was like, fair enough, right? Fair enough. And then I had another guy who was an Apache helicopter commander that came up to me and said, thank you. Like, I never heard it like that. And like, that makes sense. Like, all right, thank you. All right. And again, this is stealing from Frank Turk again, rules come from whose, not its. So when we, and this is that quote from Dawkins I said, in a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces, genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties that we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. But the problem is that doesn't correspond with reality. That's the test for truth, right? Who can live like that? Richard Dawkins can't live like that. If you read his books, he's the guy that, remember I showed you the clip, he's like, God is a maleficent, homicidal, genocidal,
yeah.
filicidal, pestilent, like
Racist.
bully.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that's bad because, right? Yeah, like you're smuggling in this moral standard that you have no basis from. And again, here's those words I talked about before. This isn't a question of how do we know what's moral. And that's one of the things you can come up with systems of ways. Like there was a guy named Immanuel Kant, who's a famous Enlightenment philosopher, and he came up with what was called the Categorical Imperative. And all that means is he said that if you can take a behavior and say that everybody should do this behavior, then that behavior would be good. And if it's a behavior that you wouldn't want everybody to do it, then that behavior is bad, right? His categorical imperative ended up being the golden rule. He said that the standard to measure things is do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Now, does that tell us how we know what's good? Think about it.
Okay.
It does, right? That's one way to do it, right? We could say like, I wouldn't want you to do it to me, so I shouldn't do it to you. Fair enough. But does that tell you that it really exists? No. And if I don't do that, so what? You see what I'm saying? That gives you good and bad, but it doesn't get you to right and wrong, does it? You could say, okay, that's good. But then, like I said, if I was rich and powerful enough and I could maximize my enjoyment by conquering the world and enslaving everybody that I wanted to, if there's no God, why shouldn't I? Or like Hitler thought that he was actually driving evolution forward and making humanity better. How can you say that he was wrong? You can't really. And so all these people today want to talk about social justice and racism's bad and inequity's bad and all that stuff. Okay, why? If you don't have a God, why? Because again, if we're just highly evolved animals, that's the way it is in nature, survival of the fittest. So it must be the same for people, right? You can say, I don't like what Hitler did, but you can't say that what Hitler did was wrong. But I'm going back to, again, that doesn't correspond with reality. Let me show you one more quick video. This might go a little over time, but so this guy's challenging more. And again, I like these videos because everything I say to you, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. But it's nice to see the conversation because it like fleshes it out a little bit.
Specific arguments for the existence of God. A creative argument, an argument for design, and an argument for morality. I first off would like to try and take down the argument on morality. Go ahead. Because it's not actually an argument for the existence of a God, it's the argument for the fact that we should have an idea of an existence of a God. Because otherwise there would be no moral basis from which we could sit on. And I disagree with that because I feel that humans are inherently altruistic and moral.
Okay, all right, stop there for just a second, Nathaniel. What do you mean by altruistic and moral?
We are giving and we care about each other.
Why is that good?
Why is that good? Because it helps our species survive.
Why is it good to survive?
Because then we can propagate and move on as a species and continue to exist.
So why is that a good thing? Who said?
Why is that a good thing?
Yeah.
Because that is what it is.
Well, that's an is. That's not an ought, though. Stalin would say, fine, Nathaniel, I'm going to survive by killing you and taking your stuff. Why is he wrong?
Because Stalin would have the initial urge not to. He would feel that the inherent urge of humans is to be caring for one another. There are situations where humans will not be caring about one another, and those are exceptions. But because humans are inherently altruistic, his first urge would be to take care of the person or try and help them. But if he has some motivation against that, then he would no longer have that urge, and he would decide that he wants to kill them because he has a reason to.
Well, again, I think you're begging the question as to what altruism is. Why is taking care of others a good thing if there is no God? That's your opinion. Is there an external referent, an authoritative, unchanging referent that you're getting that opinion from, which makes it objective, or is it just something you feel?
Humans, so if you take it from the stance that this is something that is consistent throughout humanity, that we care about one another, then we could superpose that as a moral impulse that we have.
Okay, let me agree with you. I think we do have a moral impulse. And that's exactly what C.S. Lewis said in The Abolition of Man, when he looked at all the diverse cultures and he said, they agree on basic morality. Now, how do you explain that basic morality? Well, there's maybe different ways to explain it, but some will say that's because God has written it on our hearts. But the issue isn't how we know it. The issue is, why is altruism, as you put it, or caring for one another a good thing? Who said?
It's not necessarily that who said, it is what is. We are altruistic. There is no need for someone to say that it is a good thing. It is what we are.
But if Hitler or Stalin comes along and says, I don't want to be altruistic, I want to be selfish and take everything for myself, and if I have to kill you to do that, I'm going to do that, why is that objectively wrong?
Because he is not taking care of other people.
Who said it's, where are you getting this standard to this objective standard that you ought to take care of people? Where does that come from if there's no God?
So I'm just going to talk about a little example that I know of and some others. So there's 3 different points I'd like to make. First off, we still exist. If we did not take care of each other as a social species, we would have very, very limited capabilities of still existing. We need to band together. We need to take care of each other. We need to be friendly to one another.
That's presupposing that survival is a good thing. Why is it a good thing? And why us surviving? Why not roaches? Or antelope? Or black widow spiders?
Why do you need the concept of good there? We're still surviving and we're being nice, kind to each other. We're being caring for one another.
Forgive me, Nathaniel, but you're stealing the standard of goodness from God's universe to try and make your worldview work. But if there is no objective, authoritative moral standard beyond us, then atheism doesn't work.
You know, I think you're right. There is something to that. The idea of good and evil is in a lot of ways a religious concept. But why do we need that?
Well, it depends on what you mean by religion. I'm just talking, you can leave religion out of it, it's a loaded term. Let's just say the source, ontologically, which means the study of being. Where does morality come from? Are you an atheist?
Yes.
Okay, are you a materialist?
No.
Okay, so you believe in immaterial reality, that's good. How do you explain immaterial reality if there is no God?
Could you define immaterial reality?
Oh, let's...
All right, we're going to stop there for time. All right, let's close in prayer. Lord, we just thank you for this time to think about these things. Pray that you would help us to use these things to be a good witness for you. We just thank you for the Lord Jesus and the salvation we can have through him. Thank you for this food that we'll have today, and I pray that you bless to our bodies. Thank you again. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.